The stars were dying. Admiral Zeftai pressed his crystalline hand against the viewport of his flagship, watching another star system blink out of existence. Where moments before had been the bright glow of the Kepler 442 system, now only darkness remained. The void swarm had consumed another world, another billion lives, another piece of the galaxy that would never shine again. "How many does that make?" he asked his tactical officer, though he already knew the answer would bring no comfort. 1,473 systems, Admiral," came the reply from Lieutenant Kesserel, her voice carrying the weight of despair that had become common among the Nexari fleet. In the past 6 months alone, Zeftai's species, the Nexari, were beings of living crystal. Their bodies caught and reflected light in beautiful patterns, and their ships were crafted from the same crystalline materials that made up their forms. For over 10,000 years, they had been one of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Their technology was elegant, efficient, and had helped bring peace to countless worlds, but elegance meant nothing against the void swarm. The enemy had appeared from dark space 3 years ago, emerging from gaps between dimensions that should not have existed. They were creatures of nightmare, living ships that grew and adapted, biomechanical horrors that fed on the life force of entire planets. Their technology was not built, but grown. Their ships were not piloted, but were themselves alive, hungry, and utterly alien. "Sir, incoming transmission from the Luminal High Command," his communications officer announced. The holographic display shimmered to life, revealing the ethereal form of High Luminal Velthar. The Luminals were beings of pure energy, their bodies, shifting patterns of light and electricity. They had been the galaxy's greatest source of power technology for millennia, their energy manipulation abilities unmatched by any other species. "Admiral Zeftai," Velthar's voice resonated through the bridge, carrying harmonics that most species found soothing. But today, even the Luminal's natural calm could not hide the strain. "Our defensive line at the Sigma Draconis cluster has fallen. We lost 47 energy cruisers and the 9th Luminal fleet is gone, completely absorbed." Zeftai felt his crystal structure dim with grief. The 9th fleet had been composed of 15,000 Luminal warriors, each one capable of channeling enough energy to power a small planet. If they had been absorbed by the swarm, it meant the enemy was growing stronger. "What about the Kethvar?" he asked. "Are their hive fleet still holding the inner rim?" "Barely," Velthar replied. "But Hive Queen Zacht reports that the swarm is learning to disrupt their mental connections. They're starting to hunt the queen specifically. If they lose their hive mind coordination..." Zeftai didn't need the sentence finished. The Kethvar were insectoid beings that operated through a collective consciousness. Individual Kethvar were relatively weak, but when connected through their queens, they could coordinate fleet movements across vast distances with perfect precision. Their ships moved like schools of fish, anticipating each other's actions in battle. But if the queens were being targeted, that coordination would collapse. "How long do we have?" Zeftai asked the question that haunted every military leader in the galaxy. "Our combined analysis suggests 6 months before the swarm reaches the core worlds." Velthar's form flickered with distress. 8 months before they reach Earth's sector, though the humans probably don't even know what's coming. Zeftai had heard of humans, of course. They were a young species from a small world on the galactic rim. The last survey reports had classified them as a Level 2 civilization. They had achieved interstellar travel but were still using primitive fusion drives and kinetic weapons. Most galactic species reached Level 5 or 6 before being considered for contact. Humans were at least 1,000 years away from that milestone. "The humans," Zeftai mused. "Do we have any current intelligence on them?" His intelligence officer, a young Nexari named Quilvin, pulled up the relevant files. "Last report was filed 18 months ago, sir. They've established colonies on 12 worlds in their local cluster. Their technology appears to be advancing rapidly, but it's still very crude. They use chemical explosives for weapons, metal projectiles instead of energy beams, and their ships are built like flying fortresses rather than elegant vessels." "Fortresses?" Seftai found that interesting. Most advanced species built their ships for speed and efficiency. Why would anyone build a fortress in space? Yes, sir. Very thick armor, multiple redundant systems, and weapons that seem designed more for causing massive destruction rather than precise tactical strikes. Our xenobiologists believe it's because they evolved as persistence hunters. They're naturally aggressive and seem to solve most problems by hitting them harder rather than finding elegant solutions. Felthar's energy form pulsed with what might have been amusement. Primitive, but perhaps admirable in its own way, though I doubt their projectile weapons would be effective against swarm bioarmor. Seftai was about to respond when alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Red lights flashed in warning patterns as his sensor officer called out urgent readings. Admiral, massive hyperspace distortions detected. The swarm is coming out of dark space, coordinate 74 Mark 9. How many ships? Seftai was already moving toward his command chair, his crystalline form catching the emergency lighting in. Sharp rainbow patterns. Sir, the sensors can't get an exact count. There are thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands. The main display shifted to show the tactical situation. What Seftai saw made his light dim to almost nothing. The void swarm was emerging from hyperspace in a formation that stretched across 3 star systems. Their ships were nightmarish things, organic curves mixed with mechanical components, hulls that pulsed like living tissue, and weapons that looked like they had been grown rather than built. At the center of the formation was something that defied easy description. It was massive, easily the size of a small moon, and it seemed to bend light around itself. The ship, if it could be called a ship, was the darkest thing Seftai had ever seen, as if it absorbed not just light, but hope itself. The Devourer, he whispered. It was the swarm's command vessel, the thing that had led the destruction of hundreds of worlds. Intelligence reports suggested it was not just a ship, but a living entity of immense power and malevolence. Sir, incoming transmission from all coalition fleets, his communications officer reported. Emergency coordination protocol is active. All ships are to converge on the Nexus gate system for final defense. Seftai felt the weight of the moment. The Nexus gate system was home to 12 billion souls across 4 inhabited worlds. It was also the location of the galaxy's most important hyperspace junction. If the swarm took it, they could reach any system in the galaxy within days instead of months. Signal all Nexari fleets, he commanded. Full speed to Nexus gate, and send a transmission to every species in the galaxy. Every world, every colony, every listening post. This is not just about the coalition anymore. This is about survival. As his ship's crystalline engines powered up to maximum, Seftai looked out at the approaching darkness. Somewhere out there, beyond the galactic rim, humans were going about their daily lives completely unaware that their galaxy was dying. He envied them their ignorance. The next few hours passed in a blur of hyperspace jumps and desperate coordination. Ships from across the galaxy converged on the Nexus gate system. Nexari crystal dreadnoughts, luminal energy cruisers, Kethvar, hive ships and vessels from dozens of smaller species. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history, but it still might not be enough. Fleet status report, Seftai ordered as they dropped out of hyperspace near Nexus Gate Prime. 2,300,000 ships present, sir, came the reply. Nexari 4th through 9th Fleets, Luminal High Command Battle Group, Kethvar Hive Clusters 7 through 15, and various support fleets from our allies. It sounded impressive until you considered what they faced. Intelligence estimates put the swarm's numbers at over 10 million vessels, and unlike coalition ships, swarm vessels could repair and reproduce themselves during battle. Sir, his sensor officer called out, voice tight with worry. The swarm has entered the outer system. They'll be here in 4 hours. Seftai nodded grimly. 4 hours to prepare for what might be the last battle in galactic history. Around him, his bridge crew worked with the quiet efficiency of professional soldiers, but he could see the fear in their crystalline faces. They all knew the odds. Admiral, his communications officer spoke up again. The galaxy-wide distress signal has been sent. Every species with radio capability will receive it within the next 6 hours. Good, Seftai replied, though he knew it was probably futile. What could the primitive species on the rim do against an enemy that had brought the galaxy's greatest civilizations to their knees? Still, he thought of those humans with their crude weapons and fortress-like ships. There was something about them that intrigued him, though he couldn't say what. Perhaps it was simply that they were one of the few species that had never known the kind of peace the galaxy had enjoyed for millennia. They had grown up fighting, against their environment, against each other, against every challenge their harsh world had thrown at them. Maybe that experience would serve them well in what was coming. But that was a thought for another time. Right now he had a battle to prepare for, and a galaxy to try to save. All ships, he broadcast on the fleet-wide channel. This is Admiral Seftai of the Nexari High Command. Today we make our stand. Today we show the darkness that some lights cannot be extinguished. For the galaxy. For our families. For every world that still dreams of tomorrow. The response came back from 2 million ships in 100 different languages. But the meaning was the same. They would fight. They would hold the line as long as possible, even if it meant they would all die trying. As the swarm's dark ships appeared on the edge of sensor range, Seftai allowed himself one last thought about the humans on their distant worlds. He hoped they would remember the civilizations that had fought and died to give them a chance at survival. He hoped they would do better than the rest of the galaxy had. The battle for everything was about to begin. The first wave hit the coalition fleet like a living tsunami. Admiral Seftai watched from his flagship's bridge as 10,000 swarm vessels emerged from the darkness, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with malevolent life. These were not the elegant ships of galactic civilization, built with careful attention to form and function. These were predators, grown in the void between stars, shaped by hunger and an alien intelligence that viewed all other life as food. All ships, defensive formation Nexus 7, he commanded, his crystalline voice carrying across the fleet communications. Fire at will. The response was immediate and spectacular. 2 million coalition ships opened fire simultaneously, filling space with brilliant streams of energy. Nexari crystal cannons sent focused beams of coherent light that could cut through the hull of a planet. Luminal vessels discharged massive electrical arcs that could fry the electronics of entire fleets. Kethvar ships launched swarms of guided projectiles that moved with the precision of their hive mind coordination. For a moment, Seftai allowed himself to hope. The combined firepower of the galaxy's greatest civilizations was truly impressive. Swarm ships began to break apart under the assault, their organic hulls splitting open to vent atmosphere and biofluids into space. But then the enemy began to adapt. "Sir," his tactical officer called out, voice tight with disbelief. "The swarm ships they're changing. The damaged vessels are regenerating, and the intact ones are modifying their hull composition." Seftai watched in horror as the truth became clear. Where Nexari energy beams had carved deep gouges in swarm hulls, new armor was growing. Armor that reflected and dispersed the crystal weapon's precise frequencies. Where luminol electrical attacks had burned through biomechanical systems, new insulation was forming. Thick organic barriers that absorbed the energy attacks harmlessly. "They're learning from our weapons," he whispered, in real time. This was what made the swarm so terrifying. They were not just alien. They were actively hostile to the very concept of other forms of life. Every defense the coalition used became useless within minutes as the enemy adapted. Every tactic became known, every strategy anticipated. "Sir, urgent transmission from the luminal flagship," his communications officer announced. High luminal Velthar's energy form appeared on the holographic display, but something was wrong. The usual bright coherence of his being was flickering, dimming at the edges like a candle in the wind. "Admiral," Velthar's voice carried harmonics of pain and fear. "The swarm has deployed something new. They're draining us. The energy beings among my crew are being pulled apart, absorbed into their ships." Zeftai felt his crystal structure grow cold. The luminals were beings of pure energy. They had no physical bodies to destroy, no organs to damage. They should have been immune to most forms of attack. If the swarm could absorb them. How many have you lost? He asked. 3,000 in the past 10 minutes, Velthar replied, his form flickering more violently. And it's accelerating. I don't think we can maintain formation much longer. Before Zeftai could respond, new alarms began sounding throughout his ship. His sensor officer was calling out readings in a voice that cracked with panic. Admiral, massive energy signature approaching from the swarm formation. It's the Devourer. The main tactical display shifted to show the approaching nightmare. The Devourer was even more terrifying up close than intelligence reports had suggested. It was not just large, it was impossible. The thing defied every law of physics Zeftai understood. Its hull seemed to be made of solid darkness, matter, so dense that light could not escape from its surface. Around it, space itself seemed to bend and twist, as if reality was breaking down in the presence of something that should not exist. All ships concentrate fire on the Devourer, Zeftai ordered, though he suspected it would be useless. He was right. Every weapon in the Coalition fleet turned toward the approaching monstrosity. Enough energy to destroy a small star system poured into the concentrated attack. The space around the Devourer lit up like a miniature galaxy as millions of weapons struck its hull simultaneously. The attacks simply vanished. Not reflected, not absorbed. They simply ceased to exist the moment they touched the Devourer's hull, as if the laws that governed energy and matter meant nothing to this thing. Sir, his tactical officer whispered, it's not just immune to our weapons, it's feeding on them. Every attack we make is making it stronger. Zeftai felt something he had never experienced before in his long military career. True despair. How do you fight something that becomes more powerful every time you attack it? How do you defeat an enemy that learns from your every move and grows stronger from your every effort? Incoming transmission from Hive Queen Zakth, his communications officer announced. The insectoid face of the Kethvar Queen appeared on screen, her compound eyes reflecting the fear that all Coalition forces now felt. Admiral Zeftai, she clicked in the rapid-fire language of her species. My hive reports that the swarm is targeting our queen specifically. They have some kind of psychic weapon. My sisters are going silent one by one. If we lose the hive connection... She didn't need to finish. Without their hive-mind coordination, the Kethvar fleets would become vulnerable individual ships instead of the perfectly synchronized force they were known for. How long can you maintain coordination? Zeftai asked. Maybe an hour, Zakth replied. Less if they concentrate their efforts. An hour. Zeftai looked at the tactical display, where Coalition ships were falling by the hundreds as the swarm pressed their attack. They had started this battle with over 2 million vessels. In the past 30 minutes, they had lost nearly 300,000. At this rate, the fleet would be destroyed in less than 6 hours, and then the swarm would be free to consume the 12 billion souls living on the worlds of the Nexus Gate system. Sir, his communications officer spoke up again. The galaxy-wide distress signal has been acknowledged by several species on the Outer Rim. The Tauri Federation, the Hegemony of Brass, the Human Colonial Authority, and a few others. They're asking what assistance they can provide. Under other circumstances, Zeftai might have found that amusing. What could primitive species with barely functional interstellar capability do against an enemy that was destroying the galaxy's most advanced civilizations? But right now, he was too tired and too desperate to be amused by anything. Send them tactical data, he ordered. Tell them to stay away from the core systems and to prepare for the worst. Sir, specific message from the Human Colonial Authority. Admiral Sarah Chen sends her regards and says that the human fleet is en route. The human fleet? Zeftai was confused. According to the last intelligence reports, humans had perhaps a dozen ships capable of interstellar travel. What could they possibly contribute to a battle involving millions of vessels? Yes, sir. She says estimated arrival time is... The communications officer paused, checking the data. 18 minutes. 18 minutes. Seftai almost laughed. Even if the humans had 100 ships, they would arrive just in time to watch the Coalition's final defeat. Still, he had to admire their courage. Most species were smart enough to run when faced with certain death. A massive explosion lit up the main display as another Nexari dreadnought succumbed to swarm bioplasma weapons. The beautiful crystalline ship, which had taken decades to grow and had served for centuries, broke apart in a shower of rainbow fragments that sparkled once before going dark forever. "Sir, the Luminal High Command reports they're pulling back," his tactical officer announced. "They've lost over half their energy beings to swarm absorption weapons." "And the Kethvar?" Hive Queen Zacht reports that 4 of her sister queens have gone silent. Fleet coordination is down to 60% efficiency and falling. Seftai closed his crystalline eyes and tried to think. There had to be something, some tactic or strategy that could turn the tide. But the swarm had an answer. For everything, they adapted to every weapon, countered every formation, and grew stronger with every passing minute. "Admiral," his sensor officer called out, "I'm detecting a hyperspace emergence on the edge of the system. It's not a swarm signature." Seftai opened his eyes and looked at the tactical display. A small icon had appeared at the very edge of sensor range, something coming out of hyperspace. The energy signature was unlike anything in the Coalition database. "Analysis?" he asked. "Unknown, sir. The hyperspace exit was violent, very crude compared to our quantum tunnel technology. Whatever it is, it's big, but I can only detect one contact. One ship. Whatever species had sent aid, they had sent a single vessel against a swarm fleet of millions." "Can you get visual confirmation?" Seftai asked. "Working on it, sir. The exit generated a lot of electromagnetic interference, but it's clearing up. I should have imaging in now." The main display shifted to show the edge of the system, where space was still rippling from the violent hyperspace exit. As the interference cleared, a shape began to resolve itself against the star field. Seftai stared at what appeared on screen and felt his crystalline structure resonate with confusion. The ship, if it could be called a ship, was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was massive, easily 2 kilometers long, but it looked like it had been built by someone who had no understanding of proper engineering principles. The hull was thick beyond any reasonable requirement, covered in what looked like crude armor plating welded on in overlapping sections. Weapons bristled from every surface, not the elegant energy projectors favored by advanced civilizations, but massive kinetic cannons and what appeared to be missile launchers. The whole thing looked less like a starship and more like a flying eye. Fortress built by primitives who solved every problem with more armor and bigger guns. "Sir," his communications officer said quietly, "it's human." Of course it was. Seftai found himself staring at humanity's idea of a warship, and it was exactly what he might have expected from a species that still used projectile weapons and chemical explosives. The ship looked like it had been designed by someone whose solution to every engineering challenge was to make it bigger, heavier, and more heavily armed. "Sir, the human ship is broadcasting," his communications officer announced. "Put it through," Seftai ordered, curious to hear what the primitive humans had to say. A human face appeared on the communications display. A woman with short brown hair and eyes that held a hardness Seftai recognized from veteran soldiers. She wore a uniform that looked functional rather than decorative, and when she spoke, her voice carried an authority that surprised him. "Coalition forces, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the human colonial navy ship Indomitable. We received your distress call. What's the tactical situation?" Seftai almost didn't know how to respond. How do you explain to a primitive species that the galaxy's most advanced civilizations were being systematically destroyed by an enemy they couldn't even hurt? "Admiral Chen," he replied formally, "I am Admiral Seftai of the Nexari High Command. The situation is critical. We face an enemy that adapts to our weapons and feeds on our attacks. We have lost hundreds of thousands of ships and the battle appears to be lost." The human admiral's expression didn't change. "Understood. What are your enemy's capabilities and numbers?" "Approximately 10 million vessels, with adaptive biomechanical technology that becomes immune to any weapon used against it more than once. Their command vessel appears to be immune to all known forms of attack. Admiral Chen nodded as if this was routine information. Copy that. Any friendly casualties from kinetic weapons? Zeftai was confused by the question. Kinetic weapons? No, we don't use such primitive. Why do you ask? For the first time since the conversation began, Admiral Chen smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Because we do, she said simply. And that was when space exploded around the human ship. Zeftai watched in amazement as the Indomitable opened fire with weapons he had thought were obsolete. Massive railguns launched projectiles at relativistic speeds, while missile launchers spat out hundreds of warheads in coordinated patterns. The ship wasn't just attacking, it was charging, accelerating directly toward the center of the swarm formation with what could only be described as suicidal aggression. Is she insane? His tactical officer whispered. But as Zeftai watched the primitive human vessel plow into the enemy formation, he began to understand something that chilled and amazed him in equal measure. The swarm couldn't adapt to kinetic weapons. They were trying. He could see biomechanical hulls attempting to grow armor designed to stop solid projectiles. But you can't deflect a tungsten rod moving at 10% of light speed. You can't adapt to the fundamental physics of mass and velocity. And apparently, you can't predict the tactics of a species crazy enough to ram enemy dreadnoughts with their own ship. Sir, his communications officer said in a voice filled with wonder, the humans are requesting tactical coordination. Admiral Chen wants to know if we can provide targeting data for the swarm command vessel. Zeftai stared at the tactical display, where a single human ship was carving through the enemy formation like an ancient warrior with a primitive sword, leaving destruction in its wake. Maybe, just maybe, the galaxy had found its savior. In the most unlikely place possible. The hyperspace rift that tore open above the battlefield was an abomination. Every sensor operator in the Coalition fleet felt their instruments scream warnings as reality twisted in ways that should not have been possible. Nexari quantum sensors, calibrated to detect the elegant mathematics of their species' dimensional travel, registered readings that made no sense. Luminal energy detectors, designed to measure the clean transitions of their light-speed jumps, showed patterns that violated every known law of physics. Commander Quilvin, working the sensor station aboard Admiral Zeftai's flagship, stared at his readouts in confusion and growing alarm. Sir, he called out, his crystalline voice carrying harmonics of distress. The hyperspace emergence is wrong. Everything about it is wrong. Zeftai moved to look over his subordinate's shoulder. What he saw on the displays made his own crystal structure dim with concern. Where a proper hyperspace exit should show clean mathematical curves as the ship transitioned from higher dimensions back to normal space. This emergence looked like someone had taken a crude tool and simply ripped a hole in the fabric of reality. Analysis? The Admiral requested. Sir, whoever is coming through is using some kind of brute force approach to dimensional travel. Instead of finding the natural weak points in space-time and gently opening a quantum tunnel, they appear to be tearing through by main force. The energy expenditure is enormous, and the side effects? Quilvin's voice trailed off as new readings appeared on his screens. What side effects? Zeftai demanded. Sir, they're destabilizing the local space-time continuum. The gravitational waves alone should have torn their ship apart. And the exotic matter discharge is off the charts. This level of dimensional disturbance should be impossible to survive. Across the fleet, similar conversations were taking place as sensor operators tried to make sense of what they were seeing. On the luminal flagship, High Admiral Velthar watched his energy sensors register readings that seemed to defy everything his people knew about dimensional physics. The emergence is violent beyond comprehension, he reported to his tactical staff, his energy form flickering with confusion. Whatever species designed this method of travel has either mastered forces we cannot understand, or they are completely insane. On the Kethvar hive ships, the collective consciousness of Queen Zakth processed the sensor data through thousands of linked minds simultaneously. The conclusion reached by the hive was unanimous and disturbing. This was not the work of any known galactic civilization. The dimensional signature is crude, she reported across the quantum link to her sister queens. Primitive, but somehow effective. They are achieving dimensional travel through methods that should destroy any vessel attempting them. As the rift continued to expand, every ship in the coalition fleet found their attention divided between the approaching swarm and this new unknown. The tear in space-time was massive now, easily large enough to accommodate ships the size of coalition dreadnoughts. But what was coming through? "Sir," Quilvin called out again, his voice tight with disbelief. "I'm getting mass readings. Whatever is coming through, it's big, very big." "How big?" Seftai asked, though he was beginning to suspect he wouldn't like the answer. 2 kilometers, sir. Maybe more. And the mass distribution is unusual. Instead of the efficient design we'd expect from an advanced civilization, this thing reads like a solid block of metal with engines attached. Seftai felt a chill run through his crystalline matrix. 2 kilometers was larger than most coalition capital ships, and those were marvels of engineering. Elegant structures that maximized capability while minimizing mass. A ship that read as a solid block of metal suggested construction methods that were wasteful beyond belief. Unless efficiency wasn't the point. Unless whoever built it cared more about durability than elegance. The rift reached maximum expansion, and something began to emerge. What came through the tear in space-time defied every assumption about starship design that galactic civilization held. It was indeed massive. 2 full kilometers of brutal angular construction that looked like it had been built by someone who solved every engineering problem by adding more armor and bigger weapons. The hull was thick beyond any reasonable requirement, covered in overlapping plates of what appeared to be crude metal alloy welded together in sections. There was no elegant curve work, no consideration for aesthetic appeal, no apparent attempt to minimize mass or maximize efficiency. It was a fortress that someone had somehow convinced to fly. Weapons bristled from every available surface. Not the sleek energy projectors favored by advanced civilizations, but massive kinetic cannons that looked like they could throw solid projectiles with enormous force. Missile launchers were visible in clusters along the hull, each one large enough to house warheads the size of coalition fighters. Point defense systems covered every square meter of the ship's surface in overlapping fields of fire. The engine section was perhaps the most bizarre part of the entire design. Instead of the clean fusion torches or exotic matter drives used by coalition ships, this vessel sported what appeared to be a collection of massive reaction drives that glowed with the angry orange light of barely controlled fusion reactions. The entire engine assembly looked like it had been designed by someone who believed that any problem could be solved by applying more thrust. "By the light," Admiral Seftai whispered, using an old Nexari oath. "What is that thing?" "Sir," his communications officer announced, "we're receiving an identification signal. It's human." Of course it was. Seftai stared at humanity's interpretation of a warship and found himself both horrified and impressed. Every advanced species built their vessels with efficiency in mind, maximizing capability while minimizing resource expenditure. This ship represented the exact opposite philosophy. When in doubt, add more armor, more weapons, more engines, more everything. It should have been impossible for the thing to move, let alone fight. The power requirements alone should have melted the ship from within. The structural stress of those massive weapons should have torn the hull apart. The brute force approach to hyperspace travel should have scattered its atoms across several dimensions. But here it was, solid and real and somehow functional, despite violating every principle of sensible engineering. "Sir," Quilvin called out, his voice carrying new harmonics of amazement. "The human ship it's scanning the battlefield, but their sensors, sir, they're using active scans that would blind most coalition sensors. They're flooding the entire area with radar, LiDAR, gravitational pulses and electromagnetic radiation across the entire spectrum. Aren't they worried about detection?" Seftai asked. "Sir, I don't think stealth is part of their tactical doctrine at all." Indeed, the human ship was announcing its presence to every sensor in the system. Where coalition forces relied on passive, sensors, and elegant detection methods. The humans were using what could only be described as the sensor equivalent of shouting. They were broadcasting so much energy that they lit up on every detection system like a miniature star. But as Zeftai watched, he began to understand the method behind the apparent madness. The crude human sensors were getting detailed information about the swarm formation that Coalition passive sensors had missed. The active scanning was revealing weak points in enemy hulls, power distribution patterns, and internal structural details that could prove tactically valuable. Analysis of human vessel complete, his tactical officer announced. Sir, this ship it's an aberration. The armor is 3 times thicker than any Coalition vessel would require. The weapons are kinetic-based, which we abandoned as primitive millennia ago. The power plant appears to be multiple fusion reactors running in parallel, which is incredibly wasteful and dangerous. And the entire design prioritizes durability over every other consideration. Defensive capability? Zeftai asked. Sir, based on our analysis, this ship could probably survive a direct hit from a Nexari planet cracker and keep fighting. The armor distribution suggests they expect to take massive damage and continue operating. Zeftai felt his crystal structure brighten with a realization. Every Coalition ship was built with the assumption that avoiding damage was preferable to absorbing it. Their vessels were fast, maneuverable, and designed to destroy enemies at long range before they could respond. But what if you were facing an enemy that could adapt to your weapons? What if long-range precision became useless because the enemy learned to counter your attacks? Then maybe you wanted a ship that could take enormous punishment and get close enough to deliver attacks that couldn't be adapted to. Sir, his communications officer announced. Incoming transmission from the human vessel. Put it through, Zeftai ordered. The face that appeared on his command display was unmistakably human. The bilateral symmetry, the forward-facing eyes of a predator species, the expression of contained aggression that seemed to be a universal human trait. The woman wore a uniform that looked functional rather than decorative, and when she spoke, her voice carried an authority that surprised him. Coalition forces, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the human colonial navy ship Indomitable. We received your distress call and are here to assist. Zeftai found himself studying the human admiral's face. There was something in her eyes, a hardness that spoke of experience with violence, a confidence that suggested she had faced impossible odds before and somehow survived. Her species might be primitive by galactic standards, but this individual was clearly a seasoned military commander. Admiral Chen, I am Admiral Zeftai of the Nexari High Command. We appreciate your response, but I must inform you that the situation is beyond desperate. We face an enemy that adapts to our weapons and grows stronger from our attacks. Your single ship, however well-armed, cannot significantly impact a battle involving millions of vessels. Admiral Chen's expression didn't change. Understood, Admiral. What are the enemy's specific capabilities? Zeftai found himself explaining the tactical situation to a primitive human while simultaneously wondering why he was bothering. The swarm's adaptive biotechnology, their ability to learn from every attack, their seemingly unlimited numbers. How could he make a species that still used kinetic weapons understand the hopelessness of their situation? So they adapt to energy. Weapons, Admiral Chen said when he finished. What about kinetic attacks? Kinetic weapons have been obsolete for millennia, Zeftai replied. They're crude, inefficient, and limited in their effects compared to modern energy-based systems. For the first time since the conversation began, the human admiral smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. It was the smile of a predator that had just spotted prey. Admiral, she said in a voice that carried undertones of barely restrained violence, you're about to learn why some problems require primitive solutions. And with that, the human ship did something that made every sensor operator in the Coalition fleet question their readings. It accelerated, directly toward the swarm formation, at a speed that should have been impossible for something so massive. Sir, Quilvin called out, his voice tight with disbelief. The human ship is accelerating at over 200 gravities. That level of acceleration should liquefy any crew aboard. Maybe their inertial compensation is more advanced than we thought, Zeftai suggested. Sir, I don't think they have inertial compensation. I think they're just enduring it. Zeftai stared at the tactical display as the human warship charged toward certain destruction with what could only be described as suicidal bravery. The ship was massively outnumbered, completely outgunned, and facing an enemy that had already proven capable of destroying the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, and the humans were attacking anyway. Sir, his tactical officer whispered, they're opening fire. What happened next would be analyzed by military historians for generations to come, assuming anyone survived to write military histories. The human ship erupted in violence that made the Coalition's elegant energy weapons look like gentle raindrops. Massive railguns launched tungsten projectiles at relativistic speeds, creating streaks of ionized particles as they tore through space. Missile clusters opened like deadly flowers, spitting out hundreds of warheads that accelerated toward the swarm formation with the inexorable persistence of natural law. And as the first kinetic round struck swarm bioships, something unprecedented happened. The enemy vessels simply exploded. No adaptation, no energy absorption, no clever biomechanical countermeasures, just physics. Pure, uncompromising, primitive physics applied with overwhelming force. By all the light in the galaxy, Admiral Zeftai whispered as he watched a single human ship accomplish what 2 million Coalition vessels had failed to do. They were hurting the swarm, and the galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most primitive solution is also the most effective one. The first kinetic round struck a swarm bioship at 12% the speed of light. The tungsten penetrator, no larger than a human fist, carried more energy than most Coalition ships could generate in a full day. When it impacted the organic hull of the enemy vessel, the results were not elegant or sophisticated. There was no energy manipulation, no careful targeting of weak points, no precise application of force. There was simply physics. The bioship, a kilometer-long creature of living metal and alien flesh that had adapted to energy weapons, exotic matter disruptors and quantum interference, discovered that evolution had not prepared it for the fundamental laws of mass times velocity squared. The kinetic round passed through its adaptive hull like it was tissue paper, and the entire vessel detonated in the expanding cloud of superheated organic matter. Aboard the Coalition flagship, Admiral Zeftai watched his tactical display with the stunned silence of someone witnessing the impossible. Around him, his bridge crew stood frozen as the single human warship accomplished in seconds what their entire fleet had failed to do in hours. Confirmed kill on swarm vessel designated Alpha 77, his tactical officer announced in a voice that carried harmonics of disbelief. Cause of destruction appears to be simple kinetic impact. The enemy ship didn't adapt? Zeftai asked, though he already knew the answer. Sir, analysis suggests the swarm biotechnology can modify itself to resist energy-based attacks. But, his officer paused, consulting his readings. Sir, you can't adapt to momentum. The laws of physics don't negotiate. On the main tactical display, the human ship Indomitable continued its impossible charge into the heart of the swarm formation. More railgun rounds lanced out from its hull, each one finding its target with mechanical precision. Where sophisticated, Coalition targeting systems relied on energy signatures and quantum calculations, the human weapons used simple radar and optical tracking, crude by galactic standards but apparently effective enough. Sir, his communications officer called out. The human admiral is requesting tactical coordination. She wants targeting data on priority vessels. Zeftai found his voice. Send her everything, swarm command vessels, biocarriers, anything with strategic value. He paused, watching another enemy ship explode under kinetic bombardment. And ask her what assistance we can provide. The reply came back within moments in Admiral Chen's matter-of-fact tone. Stay clear of our firing solutions and try not to get in our way. We're just getting started. Just getting started. Zeftai looked at the tactical display, where the Indomitable had already destroyed more enemy vessels in 5 minutes than most Coalition ships managed in entire battles, and wondered what human warfare looked like when they were really trying. Was about to find out. The second phase of the human attack began when the Indomitable reached optimal missile range. Clusters of launch tubes along the ship's hull opened like mechanical flowers, and hundreds of warheads streaked out toward the swarm formation. But these were not the elegant guided munitions favored by coalition forces. Missiles that could adjust their course mid-flight and strike with surgical precision. These were something else entirely. "Sir," his tactical officer announced, voice tight with amazement. "The human missiles they're nuclear weapons. Fusion warheads, each one with a yield equivalent to our tactical planet crackers." HFY felt his crystal structure dim with shock. Nuclear weapons had been abandoned by galactic civilization tens of thousands of years ago, as crude and indiscriminate. They were weapons of mass destruction, suitable only for destroying planets or asteroid fields. No civilized species would use them in ship-to-ship combat. Apparently, humans had different ideas about what constituted civilized warfare. The first nuclear warhead detonated in the middle of a swarm formation, creating a miniature star that burned for several seconds. Before fading, when the light cleared, a dozen bioships had simply ceased to exist, vaporized by temperatures that briefly matched the core of a sun. "The humans are using nuclear weapons in close formation combat," HFY said aloud, still not quite believing it. "That level of radiation should kill their own crew." "Sir," his science officer spoke up hesitantly, "scans of the human vessel suggest they have extensive radiation shielding. More than any reasonable design would require. It's as if they built their ship specifically to operate in high radiation environments." Of course they had. HFY was beginning to understand the philosophy behind human engineering. Where advanced species built elegant solutions to specific problems, humans seemed to prepare for every possible disaster simultaneously. Their ship was built to survive anything: energy weapons, kinetic impacts, radiation, boarding actions, probably even direct stellar collision. It was wasteful, inefficient, and completely insane. It was also working. On the tactical display, the Indomitable continued its charge toward the center of the swarm formation, leaving a trail of destroyed enemy vessels in its wake. Nuclear explosions lit up the darkness like a string of deadly pearls, each one eliminating enemy ships that had previously seemed invulnerable. But it was the third phase of the human attack that truly shattered every assumption about civilized warfare. "Sir," his tactical officer called out, voice cracking with disbelief, "the human ship it's not changing course. It's heading directly for that cluster of swarm dreadnoughts." HFY looked at the display and felt a chill run through his crystalline matrix. The Indomitable was indeed on a collision course with a formation of enemy capital ships, each one the size of a small moon and bristling with bioweapons. Any sane commander would alter course, use the ship's superior speed to maintain distance while continuing the bombardment. Admiral Chen was not altering course. "Are they planning to ram?" HFY whispered. The answer came moments later as the human ship struck the leading swarm dreadnought at a significant fraction of light speed. The impact was visible across the entire battlefield, a flash of light that outshone nearby stars as two massive objects converted their kinetic energy into pure destruction. Any normal ship would have been vaporized by such an impact. The Indomitable burst through the explosion, its hull scarred and burning but structurally intact, and continued toward the next enemy vessel. "Impossible," breathed his tactical officer. "No ship can survive that kind of impact." But apparently, human ships could. The Indomitable had used its own hull as a weapon, physically destroying an enemy dreadnought through the simple expedient of hitting it very hard, and somehow the human vessel's excessive armor and redundant systems had allowed it to survive the collision. "Sir," his communications officer announced. "Transmission from Admiral Chen. She says, 1 down, several million to go. We're just warming up." Warming up. HFY stared at the tactical display as the battered human ship continued its assault, using tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare, and wondered what his species had missed in their pursuit of elegant solutions. Perhaps sometimes the best answer to a sophisticated problem was to hit it with a very large stick, or in this case, a very large ship. The fourth phase of the human attack began when other swarm vessels moved to intercept the Indomitable. Bioships swarmed around the human vessel like antibodies attacking an infection, firing weapons that had proven capable of destroying coalition dreadnoughts. The human response was immediate and characteristically direct. Point defense systems along the Indomitable's hull opened fire, filling space with a storm of kinetic projectiles. But these were not the precision weapons favored by galactic civilization. They were area denial systems designed to destroy anything within a certain radius. Thousands of small railguns fired constantly, creating a defensive barrier of hypervelocity metal that shredded anything that came too close. Swarm bioweapons struck the human ship's hull, weapons that had carved through coalition armor like it was paper. The Indomitable absorbed the attacks, its excessive shielding and redundant systems allowing it to continue fighting, despite damage that would have crippled any other vessel. "Sir," his engineering officer called out, consulting readings from their long-range sensors, "the human ship has taken damage that should have destroyed it 3 times over, but they keep fighting. How is that possible?" HFY was beginning to understand. Their ship isn't designed for elegance or efficiency. It's designed for one thing: to keep fighting no matter what happens to it. Indeed, the Indomitable was demonstrating the human approach to warfare. Not sophisticated tactics or advanced technology, but simple, brutal persistence. The ship absorbed damage that would have vaporized coalition vessels, then continued fighting. When weapons were destroyed, backup systems came online. When hull sections were breached, emergency barriers sealed the damage. When primary power failed, secondary reactors kicked in. It was redundancy carried to an almost ridiculous extreme, and it was keeping the human ship in the fight when any reasonable vessel would have been destroyed. "Sir," his tactical officer announced, voice filled with amazement, "the swarm ships they're pulling back from the human vessel." For the first time in the 3-year conflict, swarm forces were retreating from an enemy. The bioships that had swarmed the Indomitable were backing away, apparently unable to deal with an opponent that simply refused to be destroyed. But Admiral Chen was not content to let them escape. The Indomitable pursued the retreating swarm vessels, its engines blazing with fusion fire as it accelerated to speeds that should have been impossible for something so massive. More nuclear warheads streaked out from the human ship, each one eliminating enemy vessels that had previously seemed invincible. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "Admiral Chen is requesting targeting data on the swarm command vessel. She says she has something special planned for it." HFY looked at the tactical display, where the massive devourer sat at the center of the swarm formation like a dark hole in space. The thing had already proven immune to every weapon the coalition possessed. What could the humans possibly do against something that absorbed energy attacks and seemed to defy the laws of physics? "Send her the targeting data," he ordered, "and ask her what she needs from us." The reply came back immediately. "Just stay clear of the blast radius. This might get messy." Messy. HFY watched the human ship alter course toward the devourer and wondered what human commanders considered messy, if nuclear weapons and ramming attacks were considered normal tactics. He was about to find out. As the Indomitable approached the swarm command vessel, every sensor in the coalition fleet focused on the upcoming engagement. This was the moment that would determine the fate of the galaxy. Would human weapons prove effective against the enemy's most powerful vessel? Or would the devourer absorb the primitive kinetic attacks as easily as it had absorbed everything else? "Sir," his tactical officer announced quietly, "the human ship is charging its main weapon. Power readings are—" "Sir, they're off the charts. Whatever they're planning to fire requires more energy than our entire fleet generates." HFY felt his crystal structure brighten with sudden understanding. The humans hadn't just brought kinetic weapons to the battle, they had brought the biggest kinetic weapon anyone had ever conceived. And they were about to fire it at point-blank range. "All ships," he broadcast on the fleet-wide channel, "emergency withdrawal to minimum safe distance. The humans are about to teach us what primitive really means." As coalition forces pulled back to a safe distance, The Indomitable continued its approach toward the Devourer. Two titans on a collision course that would determine the fate of every living thing in the galaxy. And for the first time since the war began, Admiral HFY found himself believing that victory might be possible, even if it required learning from a species that solved every problem by hitting it harder than anyone thought possible. The moment before Admiral Sarah Chen fired humanity's ultimate weapon, the galaxy held its breath. Every sensor in the Coalition fleet was focused on the Indomitable as it approached the Devourer, the swarm's command vessel that had proven immune to every attack the galaxy's most advanced civilizations could devise. The massive biomechanical monstrosity sat in space like a wound in reality itself, its dark hull absorbing light and hope in equal measure. Aboard his flagship, Admiral HFY watched the readings from his tactical displays with crystalline features bright with tension. The human ship had already accomplished the impossible, destroying swarm vessels that had adapted to every known weapon, using tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. But the Devourer was different. It was not just another enemy ship. It was the heart of the swarm, the intelligence that coordinated millions of biovessels across the galaxy. If the humans could destroy it. "Sir," his tactical officer announced, voice tight with anticipation. "The human vessel has reached optimal firing position. Distance to target, 15,000 kilometers. 15,000 kilometers. For energy weapons, that was practically point-blank range. But for kinetic weapons, it meant the target had virtually no time to react once the projectile was fired. Power readings from the human ship are still climbing," his sensor operator added. "Sir, they're channeling the output of their entire reactor array into a single weapon system." HFY felt a chill run through his crystal matrix. He had thought the humans were reckless before, but using their entire power grid to fire one shot was beyond reckless. It was suicidal. If the weapon failed to destroy the Devourer, the Indomitable would be defenseless, its power systems drained, and its engines dead. What kind of weapon requires that much energy? He wondered aloud. His science officer consulted the sensor readings. "Sir, based on the power consumption and the mass readings we detected earlier, I believe they're accelerating a very large projectile to an extremely high velocity. The energy requirements suggest they're attempting to reach a significant fraction of light speed." A very large projectile at a significant fraction of light speed. HFY tried to imagine the kinetic energy involved and found the numbers almost incomprehensible. The weapon the humans were preparing to fire would carry more destructive force than most Coalition fleet actions. "Sir," his communications officer called out. "Transmission from Admiral Chen." The human face appeared on his display, and HFY was struck by the calm determination in her eyes. She looked like someone who had made peace with whatever was about to happen. "Admiral HFY," she said in her characteristically direct manner, "I want to thank you and your people for fighting as long as you did. What we're about to do, well, let's just say it's not something we do lightly." "Admiral Chen," HFY replied, "what exactly are you planning?" Chen's expression didn't change. "We're going to solve this problem the human way. Sometimes the best solution is the simplest one, even if it seems primitive to more advanced civilizations." Before HFY could ask what she meant, the transmission cut out. On his tactical display, the energy readings from the human ship spiked to levels that should have been impossible. "Sir," his tactical officer whispered, "they're firing." What emerged from the Indomitable's main weapon was not a missile or an energy beam. It was a solid projectile, a tungsten rod 50 meters long and 5 meters in diameter, accelerated to 25% the speed of light by magnetic fields that consumed every erg of power the human ship could generate. The HFY projectile crossed the distance to the Devourer in less than a second. When it struck, the result was not an explosion in any conventional sense. It was the conversion of mass to energy, on a scale that briefly outshone the system's star. The tungsten rod, carrying kinetic energy equivalent to several large antimatter warheads, punched through the Devourer's reality-bending hull as if it were paper. The swarm command vessel, the nightmare that had consumed hundreds of star systems and proven immune to every weapon the galaxy possessed, simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, a dark wound in space. The next moment there was only an expanding sphere of superheated plasma that had once been matter from both the projectile and its target. For several seconds, the battlefield was silent. Every ship in both fleets sat motionless, their crews trying to process what they had just witnessed. Then the remaining swarm vessels began to convulse. "Sir?" Zeftai's sensor operator called out, voice filled with amazement. "The swarm fleet is... They're losing coordination. The bioships are firing on each other, ramming into their own vessels. It's complete chaos." Without the Devourer's guiding intelligence, the swarm's individual vessels reverted to basic biological imperatives. They turned on each other like animals. Their sophisticated coordination dissolved into primitive competition for resources. Ships that had moved in perfect formation now clawed at their neighbors, bioweapons firing indiscriminately into their own ranks. "The swarm fleet is destroying itself," Zeftai said in wonder. "The humans. They found the critical weakness. Remove the command structure, and the entire force collapses." On his display, the Indomitable drifted powerless, its energy completely exhausted by the massive weapon discharge. But the human ship had accomplished what 2 million coalition vessels could not. It had ended the threat that had brought the galaxy to its knees. "Sir," his communications officer announced, "Admiral Chen is requesting assistance. Their power systems are completely drained and they need time to restart their reactors." "Dispatch rescue vessels immediately," Zeftai ordered. "Full honors escort for the ship that saved the galaxy." As coalition vessels moved to assist the powerless human ship, Zeftai found himself reconsidering everything he thought he knew about warfare, technology, and civilization itself. The humans had won not through superior technology or elegant tactics, but through sheer bloody-minded determination and a willingness to use solutions that more advanced species had dismissed as primitive. 3 hours later, Admiral Chen stood in the briefing room of Zeftai's flagship, surrounded by the coalition's senior military leadership. Representatives from every major species in the galaxy were present, either in person or through holographic projection. The woman who had single-handedly turned the tide of galactic war looked remarkably ordinary. Medium height, brown hair, wearing a uniform that was functional rather than decorative. But when she spoke, every being in the room listened with the attention due to someone who had just saved their civilization. "The swarm is finished as an organized threat," Chen reported matter-of-factly. "Without their command vessel, the remaining bioships have reverted to basic predatory behavior. They're eliminating each other faster than they ever eliminated us. Our analysis suggests the threat will be completely neutralized within 6 months." High Luminal Velthar, his energy form still flickering from the damage his people had sustained, spoke first. "Admiral Chen, your species has accomplished what our combined civilizations could not. We owe you a debt that can never be repaid." Chen shook her head. "You don't owe us anything. You fought for 3 years against impossible odds. You sent out a distress call asking for help and we answered. That's what neighbors do." "But your tactics," Queen Zaxth clicked in her rapid insectoid language. "Your weapons, your strategies, they were so primitive, yet they were more effective than our most advanced systems. How is this possible?" Chen smiled, and for the first time since Zeftai had met her, it was a genuinely warm expression, rather than the predatory grin of a warrior. "Sometimes the most sophisticated problems require the most basic solutions. You tried to fight the swarm with elegant weapons and advanced tactics, but the swarm was designed to counter sophistication, to adapt to whatever you threw at them and become stronger." She gestured to the tactical display, where the remaining swarm vessels continued their self-destructive rampage. "But you can't adapt to physics, you can't evolve a defense against momentum, and you can't negotiate with a tungsten rod moving at a quarter light speed." "Your ship," Zeftai said, still struggling to understand. "It survived damage that should have destroyed it dozens of times over. How?" "Because we built it to get hit," Chen replied simply. "Our philosophy is different from yours. Where you build ships to avoid damage, we build them to absorb it and keep fighting. Where you rely on elegant solutions, we use redundancy and brute force. It's not as sophisticated, but sometimes sophistication is a weakness rather than a strength. Velthar's energy form pulsed with curiosity. But the resource expenditure must be enormous. The inefficiency of such designs is irrelevant when the alternative is extinction, Chen finished. We learned a long time ago that the most efficient solution isn't always the best solution. Sometimes you need something that works rather than something that's perfect. The briefing continued for several more hours, with coalition leaders asking detailed questions about human tactics, technology, and strategic philosophy. What emerged was a picture of a species that had developed along completely different lines from the rest of galactic civilization. Where most species had pursued elegance and efficiency, humans had focused on durability and redundancy. Where others had developed sophisticated solutions to complex problems, humans had maintained a preference for simple, robust approaches that could handle unexpected situations. It was a philosophy born from their home world, a planet where natural disasters were common, where survival required the ability to adapt to rapidly changing conditions, where the difference between life and death often came down to who could endure the most punishment and keep functioning. Admiral Chen, Zeftai said as the briefing drew to a close, what are humanity's intentions now? You've proven yourself capable of significant military action. Some species might be concerned about your expansion into the galaxy. Chen's expression grew serious. Admiral, we didn't come here to conquer anyone. We came because neighbors were in trouble and asked for help. That's all. We have no interest in ruling the galaxy or imposing our will on other species. She paused, looking around the room at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. But we do have one condition for our continued cooperation. The room fell silent. This was the moment many had been dreading, the demands of the victorious primitives. We want to be treated as equals, Chen said simply. Not as junior partners or primitive cousins who need guidance. We've proven we can handle ourselves in a crisis. We want a seat at the table when decisions are made that affect the galaxy. The request was so reasonable that several coalition leaders seemed surprised. They had expected demands for territory, resources, or tribute. Instead, the humans wanted only recognition and respect. Done, Zeftai said immediately. The coalition would be honored to welcome humanity as a full member species. The formal ceremonies would come later. Treaties would be signed, ambassadors exchanged, and humanity would take its place among the stars as an equal partner in galactic civilization. But the real change had already occurred in the minds of every being who had witnessed the battle. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the most primitive solution was also the most effective one. That sophistication could be a weakness as well as a strength. That there was value in approaches that prioritized function over form, durability over elegance, and results over efficiency. And perhaps most importantly, they had learned that when the darkness came calling, sometimes what you needed wasn't advanced technology or elegant tactics. Sometimes what you needed was humans. As Admiral Chen prepared to return to her ship, Zeftai found himself asking one final question. Admiral, there's something I must know. When you saw our distress call, when you learned about the swarm and the hopelessness of our situation, why did you come? Your single ship could not have hoped to make a meaningful difference against such overwhelming odds. Chen paused at the doorway and looked back at him. Her answer, when it came, was delivered in the same matter-of-fact tone she had used throughout their conversations. Because that's what humans do, she said simply. When someone asks for help, we help. When someone needs fighting, we fight. It doesn't matter if the odds are impossible or if we're completely outgunned. We show up anyway. She smiled one last time. The galaxy is a big, dangerous place, Admiral, but as long as humans are in it, nobody fights alone. As her shuttle departed for the Indomitable, Zeftai stood at his viewport watching the rescue operations continue around the drifting swarm vessels. The war was over, the galaxy was saved, and a new chapter in galactic history was beginning. A chapter where the most important question wasn't how sophisticated your technology was, but whether you were willing to stand up when it mattered. The galaxy had found its guardians in the most unlikely place possible. And for the first time in 3 years, The stars shone a little brighter.
The small scout ship Horizon drifted silently through the void, its engines running on minimal power. Lieutenant James Cooper sat in the pilot's seat, his eyes fixed on the sensor displays. This far from human space, discoveries were rare but potentially valuable. Cooper had been mapping this sector for 3 weeks now, and the monotony was starting to wear on him. Another day, another empty patch of space, he muttered to himself. Cooper was about to mark this section complete when a faint energy signature appeared at the edge of his sensors. He straightened in his seat, suddenly alert. The signature wasn't consistent with any known natural phenomenon. "Computer, analyze that energy pattern," he commanded. Analysis complete. The ship's AI responded in its flat voice. Energy signature matches no known natural or artificial patterns in database. Source appears to be stationary. Cooper's heart beat faster. New discoveries meant promotions, and he was due for one. He adjusted his course and guided the Horizon toward the mysterious energy source. As he approached, the ship's external cameras revealed a structure floating in space. It was clearly artificial, a space station of some kind, but unlike any human design. Its architecture featured smooth curves and sharp angles that seemed to defy conventional engineering. Most notably, it appeared to be abandoned. "This is Lieutenant James Cooper of the Earth Exploration Fleet. I've discovered an unknown structure at coordinates 357 to 890 to 104. Moving in for closer inspection." Cooper recorded his message but didn't send it. Communications this far out were delayed by hours, and protocol gave scouts discretion to investigate non-hostile discoveries. He'd submit a full report later. The Horizon circled the station slowly. Cooper noted that there were no visible weapon systems, and several docking ports matched standard configurations used throughout the galaxy. After running safety checks, he decided to dock and explore. "Computer, maintain ship readiness. I'm going aboard," he said, strapping a sidearm to his hip and grabbing his exploration kit. The docking process went smoothly, suggesting the station still had functioning systems. When the airlock completed its cycle, Cooper stepped into the station, his helmet's lights illuminating the dark corridor ahead. The air was breathable, according to his suit's sensors, but he kept his helmet on as a precaution. The station's interior was surprisingly intact. There were no signs of battle or hasty evacuation, just emptiness, as if the occupants had simply left one day. The architecture was elegant but practical, with markings in a script Cooper didn't recognize. Following the main corridor, Cooper reached what appeared to be a central control room. The moment he stepped inside, lights flickered on, and dormant systems began to activate. "Hello," he called out, knowing it was foolish but unable to help himself. Only silence answered him, but several screens around the room had come to life, displaying information in the same unknown script. Cooper approached one of the terminals and noticed an interface that looked similar enough to standard galactic designs. He pulled out his universal translator and attached it to the console. "Let's see what secrets you're hiding," he whispered. The translator took several minutes to process the language, but eventually began converting the alien text to English. Most of it was incomprehensible technical jargon, but Cooper could make out references to ship designs and weapon systems. His curiosity growing, Cooper navigated through the files until he found something that made him pause. The screen displayed what appeared to be schematics for a massive warship, unlike anything Cooper had ever seen. According to the translator, this vessel was designated as Project Terminus. The more Cooper read, the more his disbelief grew. If the data was correct, this ship design incorporated technologies that should be impossible. Power systems that could harness energy directly from subspace. Weapons capable of disrupting the atomic bonds of target materials. Defensive shields that could adapt to any form of attack. "This can't be real," Cooper said to himself. "These specs violate at least 3 laws of physics." But the data was comprehensive, detailed schematics, material requirements, construction techniques, and theoretical frameworks explaining how each system would function. The unknown aliens had been planning to build this ship, but something had stopped them. Cooper continued searching until he found what appeared to be a log entry. The translator struggled with it, but the message was clear enough. Project Terminus suspended by order of the High Council. The potential capabilities of such a vessel exceed acceptable parameters for controlled warfare. It is the Council's judgment that no species should possess such power. All research is to be sealed, and the development facility abandoned. The date stamp indicated the message was over 300 years old. As Cooper continued exploring the database, he found another file, a message that hadn't been properly deleted. After translation, it read, "I cannot destroy this work. Though the Council fears what we have created, I fear what may come from the darkness between stars. Should any worthy species find this, may they use it more wisely than we would have. The safeguards have been removed. The knowledge is yours, but heed our warning. What can destroy enemies can destroy worlds." Cooper sat back, his mind racing. The aliens had created designs for a warship so powerful they'd scared themselves into abandoning it. And now he had found it. He quickly began downloading all the data to his ship's computer. If even half of what he was seeing was feasible, this could revolutionize human defense capabilities. The Earth fleet had been at peace for decades, but tensions with several alien federations had been growing. A technological advantage like this could ensure humanity's safety, or trigger a new arms race. The download completed, Cooper did one final sweep of the station before returning to his ship. As the horizon disconnected from the docking port, Cooper looked back at the abandoned structure. Whatever species had built that station had reached for a power they ultimately deemed too dangerous. Now he had to decide what to do with their legacy. Back aboard his ship, Cooper reviewed the data more carefully. The designs were elegant but complex. Some of the technologies described seemed to operate on principles human science had only theorized about. Building this warship would require resources and expertise beyond what any single person could manage. When Cooper arrived at Earth Central Station 3 weeks later, he immediately requested a meeting with Admiral Wilson, the head of the fleet's Research and Development Division. The meeting didn't go as he'd hoped. "These designs are fascinating, Lieutenant," Admiral Wilson said, flipping through Cooper's report, "but clearly impossible. Our top engineers would tell you the same." "Sir, I've spent weeks studying the data. The theoretical framework is sound. We've just never approached the problems from this angle," Cooper argued. The Admiral sighed. "Cooper, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but these specs describe a ship with more firepower than our entire fleet combined, protected by shields our weapons couldn't dent, powered by an energy source we barely understand. It's science fiction." "But sir—" "Enough," Wilson said firmly. "I'll have our team review the data, but don't get your hopes up. This was probably some alien species thought experiment, or worse, propaganda meant to be found. Focus on your actual duties, Lieutenant." Cooper left the meeting frustrated but not surprised. The military was notoriously resistant to outside ideas. As he walked through the station's crowded corridors, his mind was already forming a new plan. If the official channels wouldn't take this seriously, he knew someone who would. Dr. Lisa Reed had been his friend since academy days, and she now worked at the Frontier Engineering Corps. If anyone could make sense of these designs, it would be her. Cooper tapped his communicator. "Lisa, it's James. I found something you need to see. Something that shouldn't exist, but it does." Dr. Lisa Reed's workshop was a mess of tools, half-built machines, and digital displays showing complex equations. Unlike the clean, organized labs of Earth Central, Lisa preferred what she called creative chaos. It was this unconventional approach that had drawn Cooper to her in the first place. "So let me get this straight," Lisa said, her eyes never leaving the holographic display of the alien schematics. "You found these designs on an abandoned station, and the military just dismissed them." Cooper nodded. "Admiral Wilson thinks it's either alien fiction or some kind of trap. He wouldn't even let the engineering team do a proper analysis." Lisa snorted. "Typical. The military only likes new ideas when they come from inside their own ranks. She zoomed in on one section of the design. But this is incredible, James. If these power calculations are correct, this ship could generate more energy than our entire fleet combined. So you think it could work? Cooper asked, hope rising in his voice. Lisa ran her fingers through her short red hair, a habit when she was deep in thought. Theoretically, yes. The physics checks out, even if it pushes against what we currently understand as possible. The real question is whether we could actually build it with our current technology and materials. For the next week, Lisa dove into the alien data, barely sleeping or eating. Cooper brought her food and occasionally forced her to rest, but her excitement was infectious. On the 8th day, she called Cooper with news. I figured it out, she said, her voice hushed but excited. We can build this ship, James, not exactly as designed. Some of the materials they specify don't exist in our part of the galaxy, but I found substitutes that should work nearly as well. Cooper's heart raced. Are you serious? Completely. But we'll need help, and we can't go through official channels. If the military gets involved, this will get buried in bureaucracy for decades. What do you suggest? Lisa's smile was visible even through the video call. I know some people who might be interested in a private engineering project. 2 days later, Cooper and Lisa met at a small diner near the edge of Earth Central. They were joined by 2 others. Mark Davis, a burly man with a thick beard who had once been the military's top weapons specialist before a disagreement with leadership led to his retirement, and Tom Wilson, a thin, nervous-looking AI systems expert who had worked with Lisa on several frontier projects. This is highly illegal, you know, Tom said after Lisa had explained the project. Using military resources for a private venture. We could all end up in prison. We're not using military resources, Lisa corrected. We're using discarded parts and materials that have been written off. Technically, they're waste. Mark laughed, a deep rumbling sound. She's got you there, Tom. Besides, if this ship works like the design suggests, they'll be pinning medals on us, not throwing us in cells. And if it doesn't work? Tom asked. Then we've wasted some time and salvaged materials, Cooper said. No harm done. After much discussion, they all agreed to join the project. Mark knew of an abandoned mining facility on a remote asteroid in the Kuiper Belt that would serve as their construction site. Tom had access to several decommissioned AI cores that could be reprogrammed for the ship's systems. Lisa had already begun adapting the alien designs to work with human technology. Over the next 6 months, the team worked in secret. They created shell companies to acquire the materials they couldn't salvage, using Cooper's military salary and Lisa's research grants to fund the project. The mining facility, once cleared of old equipment, provided a perfect hidden dry dock for their construction. The ship took shape slowly. Unlike the sleek, streamlined vessels of the Earth fleet, this design was angular and asymmetrical, with sections that seemed to jut out at random angles. But Lisa assured them that every aspect of the design served a purpose, optimizing energy flow and weapon deployment. The power core is the most challenging part, Lisa explained one day as they worked. According to the schematics, it taps directly into subspace, drawing energy from the quantum fluctuations that exist between dimensions. Our science has theorized this is possible, but we've never successfully built a device to do it. And you think we can? Cooper asked. Lisa patted a large cylindrical device that hummed with a strange, almost musical tone. I already have. This is a scaled-down version of the core described in the alien data. It's only operating at about 10% capacity, but that's still enough to power this entire facility. The weapon systems were Mark's domain. He had adapted the alien designs to create what he called phase disruptors, weapons that didn't just damage targets but temporarily altered the atomic bonds of the materials they hit. It's not quite as powerful as what was in the original specs, he admitted, but it still leagues beyond anything in our current arsenal. One shot from this could disable a standard cruiser. Tom, meanwhile, had been integrating the ship's AI systems. The aliens designed this ship to be mostly automated, he explained. A crew of 5 could operate it, compared to the hundreds needed for our current capital ships. As the construction progressed, Cooper couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The ship, which they had started calling Impossibility as a joke that stuck, was becoming more than just a theoretical project. It was becoming real, and with its reality came questions about what they would do with it once completed. "We'll turn it over to the fleet, of course," Cooper said when Lisa raised the question one evening. "Once they see it works, they'll have to take it seriously." Lisa didn't seem convinced. "And if they decide it's too dangerous? If they try to dismantle it or lock it away for study?" Before Cooper could answer, an alarm blared throughout the facility. Tom rushed to a console, his fingers flying over the controls. "We've got a problem," he said, his voice tight. "There's a Galactic Alliance patrol ship in the area. They're scanning for the source of our energy emissions." "Can they detect us?" Mark asked. Tom shook his head. "Not yet. We're masking most of our signature, but if they come closer..." "How long until the Impossibility is operational?" Cooper asked Lisa. She hesitated. "The main systems are functioning, but we haven't tested the engines or weapons in real conditions. We'd be flying blind." Cooper made a quick decision. "Shut down all non-essential systems. We'll let them pass by, then resume work once they're gone." The team complied, and the facility fell into near darkness, the only light coming from emergency systems and the eerie glow of the power core, which couldn't be fully shut down without a lengthy procedure. For 3 tense days, they waited as the Alliance ship conducted its patrol. The ship came close enough at one point that they could see it through the facility's observation windows, a sleek, official vessel with the Alliance emblem emblazoned on its hull. On the 4th day, Tom reported that the ship had finally moved on. They logged an anomalous energy reading, but classified it as a sensor malfunction. "We got lucky." As they powered the systems back up, Cooper received an urgent message on his personal communicator. It was from an old friend in the fleet, warning him that strange reports were coming in from the outer colonies. Unknown ships had been spotted at the edge of human space, and several outposts had gone dark. "We need to accelerate our timeline," Cooper told the team, showing them the message. "Something's happening out there, and we might need the Impossibility sooner than we thought." Lisa nodded grimly. "I'll focus on getting the engines and defensive systems online. Mark, we need those weapons ready, even if they're not at full capacity." "What about the Alliance?" Tom asked. "If they come back, we'll deal with that if it happens," Cooper said. "Right now, our priority is finishing this ship." As the team returned to work with renewed urgency, Cooper stood looking at the Impossibility through the control room window. The ship that shouldn't exist was nearly complete. Now they just had to hope they would finish it in time. The emergency broadcast woke Cooper from a brief rest. He had been sleeping in 4-hour shifts for the past week as they rushed to complete the Impossibility. The message was being transmitted on all channels, Priority 1. "This is Admiral Wilson of the Earth Defense Fleet. All available ships are ordered to converge on the Proxima colony. We are under attack by unknown forces. This is not a drill." Repeat, "This is not a drill." Cooper played the message twice before calling the others to the command center. Their tired faces reflected his own concern as they gathered around the communications console. "It started," Mark said grimly, his usual jovial manner gone. Tom looked nervous. "The Proxima colony is home to over 2 million people. If they're calling for all available ships, then the situation is dire," Lisa finished. She turned to Cooper. "What's our status?" Cooper pulled up the latest diagnostic reports on the main screen. Main power is at 86% capacity. Hull integrity is solid. Navigation and life support are fully operational. Defensive shields are functioning but untested at full power. "And weapons?" Lisa asked, looking at Mark. The weapons specialist frowned. The main phase disruptors are installed but calibrated to only 60% of designed capacity. We haven't had time to fine-tune the targeting systems. Secondary weapons are operational but limited in range. What about the engines? Cooper asked. The subspace drive is online, Lisa replied. We've run simulations, but we haven't taken it beyond this asteroid's orbit. In theory, it should be faster than any ship in the Earth fleet, but I can't guarantee it won't tear itself apart the first time we push it hard. Cooper took a deep breath. The impossibility wasn't ready, but it might be ready enough. How long to Proxima at maximum speed? Lisa made some quick calculations. About 14 hours. A standard fleet cruiser would take 3 days. Then we don't have a choice, Cooper said. We have to go. Now. No one argued. They had all seen the reports coming in from the outer colonies over the past few days. Strange ships appearing without warning. Communications going dark. The few images that had been transmitted showed vessels unlike any known design. Black, insect-like craft that moved with unnatural precision. Within an hour, they had the impossibility prepped for departure. The ship hummed with energy as its systems came fully online for the first time. From the outside, it looked incomplete, with sections of hull plating missing and exposed conduits visible in places. But its core systems, the ones that mattered, were functional. I'm setting course for Proxima, Cooper announced as they took their positions on the small bridge. Tom, keep the communications channels open. We need to know what we're flying into. What about the fleet? Lisa asked. Do we announce ourselves? Cooper shook his head. Not yet. Let's see what we're dealing with first. The impossibility eased out of the mining facility that had been its birthplace. Its engines glowed with an eerie blue light as they powered up. Then, with a flash that briefly outshone the distant sun, the ship vanished into subspace. The journey was tense. Reports continued to come in, each more alarming than the last. The unknown attackers, which survivors were calling the Vex, had destroyed 3 Earth cruisers with minimal effort. Their weapons cut through standard shields as if they weren't there. Their hulls absorbed direct hits from Earth's most powerful weapons with barely a scratch. Approaching Proxima system, Tom announced after what felt like an eternity, dropping out of subspace in 3, 2, 1. The view screen flashed as the impossibility returned to normal space. The scene that greeted them was one of chaos and destruction. The space around Proxima was filled with debris, the remains of Earth ships and orbital platforms. In the distance, the colony itself was visible, its once bright lights now flickering and partial. And there, moving methodically through the wreckage, were 5 black ships. They resembled giant insects with multiple appendage-like structures that served unknown purposes. Each was at least twice the size of the largest Earth cruiser. They're attacking the colony's main dome, Tom reported, horror in his voice. Life signs are dropping rapidly. Cooper made a split-second decision. Battle stations. Mark, ready the phase disruptors. Target the nearest Vex ship. What about the fleet? Lisa asked. There's no time, Cooper replied. If those domes fall, everyone in the colony dies. The impossibility moved forward, accelerating toward the nearest Vex vessel. Its presence hadn't been noticed yet, a small blessing given their unfinished state. We're in range, Mark announced. Phase disruptors charged and ready. Cooper took a deep breath. Fire. The impossibility shuddered slightly as its main weapons discharged for the first time. Beams of blue-white energy lanced out, striking the Vex ship directly on what appeared to be its central section. Unlike standard weapons, which would have exploded on impact, the phase disruptors seemed to pass through the ship's hull, creating a rippling effect like water disturbed by a stone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Vex ship's movements became erratic. Parts of its hull began to distort and collapsed as the atomic bonds holding its materials together temporarily weakened. Secondary explosions erupted across its surface as internal systems failed catastrophically. Direct hit, Mark shouted, jubilant. Their hull integrity is failing. The remaining Vex ships immediately changed course, abandoning their attack on the colony and turning toward the impossibility. Their response was faster than any human vessel could have managed. "They've seen us," Tom warned. "All 4 remaining ships are on an intercept course." "Evasive maneuvers," Cooper ordered. "Ready the next shot." The impossibility banked sharply, its experimental engines responding with a speed that pushed them all back into their seats. The Vex ships fired, bright red beams that sliced through space where the impossibility had been moments before. One beam grazed their port side, sending alarms blaring throughout the ship. Lisa's fingers flew over her console, redirecting power. "Shields holding at 78%, she reported. "That was a direct hit with enough power to destroy a standard cruiser, and we survived." "The designs were right," Cooper said, a grim smile on his face. "Ready another shot, Mark. Let's see if we can make it 2 for 2. The impossibility turned sharply, bringing its main weapons to bear on the lead Vex ship. This time, the enemy was ready, performing an impossible maneuver that should have torn any ship apart. The phase disruptor beam missed its center mass, instead grazing its outer hull. But even that glancing blow was enough to cause visible damage. Part of the Vex ship's outer structure warped and tore away, venting atmosphere and debris into space. "They're coordinating," Tom mourned, "attempting to surround us." Cooper studied the tactical display. The Vex ships were indeed maneuvering to box in the impossibility, using their superior numbers to their advantage. "Lisa, how much power can you give to the engines?" Cooper asked. "We're already at 90%, she replied. "I can push it to full capacity, but I can't guarantee the structural integrity will hold." "Do it," Cooper ordered. "Mark, target all 4 ships with secondary weapons. We're going to punch straight through their formation." As the impossibility's engines surged to full power, the ship shot forward at a speed no human vessel had ever achieved. The Vex ships fired repeatedly, but most of their shots missed as the impossibility's trajectory became nearly impossible to predict. The few hits that did connect were absorbed by the ship's advanced shields, which flared bright blue with each impact but held firm. As they passed through the enemy formation, Mark fired the secondary weapons, smaller versions of the phase disruptors that struck all 4 Vex ships simultaneously. The damage was less catastrophic than the main weapons had caused, but it was enough to disrupt the Vex coordination. "We're clear," Tom announced, coming around for another pass. Cooper checked the ship's status. Despite the intensity of the brief battle, the impossibility was holding together. The alien design was proving its worth beyond all expectations. "Open a channel to the Earth fleet," Cooper ordered. "It's time they knew we were here." As Tom established the connection, Cooper gazed out at the colony they had just saved. The impossible warship had faced its first test and passed. But this was only the beginning of what promised to be a much larger conflict. Admiral Wilson's face on the view screen was a mixture of shock, anger, and reluctant admiration. The aging military leader had been speechless for several seconds after Cooper had explained the impossibility's origins. "Let me get this straight, Lieutenant," Wilson finally said. "You not only disobeyed direct orders by pursuing this alien technology, but you also stole military resources, recruited other personnel into your scheme, and built an unauthorized warship in secret." Cooper stood firm. "With respect, Admiral, we primarily used discarded materials and personal resources, and that unauthorized warship just saved the Proxima colony when 3 of our most advanced cruisers were destroyed." The Admiral's jaw tightened. "That's beside the point, Cooper. What you did was necessary," Lisa interrupted, stepping into view beside Cooper. "The Vex ships would have destroyed the colony if we hadn't intervened. We've all seen the reports. 6 outer colonies attacked in the past week, and conventional weapons barely scratched their hulls." Admiral Wilson sighed heavily. "Dr. Reed, I expected better from someone with your reputation." "My reputation is built on following the science wherever it leads," Lisa replied calmly. And this alien technology led to a ship that can actually fight these invaders. There was a long pause as Wilson seemed to weigh his options. The battle over Proxima had been recorded from multiple sources. The footage of the impossibility destroying one Vex ship and damaging 4 others was already spreading throughout the fleet. In a time of crisis, results mattered more than regulations. "Report to Earth Central immediately," Wilson finally ordered. "Your ship will be impounded for study, and all of you will face a formal inquiry." But he added, his tone softening slightly, "I'm also ordering a full engineering team to meet you there. If this technology is as effective as it appears, we need to understand it immediately." When the transmission ended, the bridge was silent for a moment. "That went better than expected," Mark commented with a wry smile. Tom looked less convinced. "They're going to take the ship away from us, aren't they?" Cooper nodded slowly. "Probably, but they'll have to acknowledge its value first. And that means the design will be put to use, which was always the goal." The journey to Earth Central took 9 hours, a trip that would have taken a standard cruiser nearly a week. When they arrived, a full military escort was waiting, along with dozens of engineers and scientists eager to examine the impossibility. As predicted, the ship was immediately impounded, and Cooper's team was separated for questioning. Cooper himself was interrogated for 12 straight hours by military intelligence, explaining in exhaustive detail how he had found the alien station and every step they had taken to build the impossibility. On the 3rd day of the inquiry, Cooper was summoned to a high-security conference room deep within Earth Central. To his surprise, he found Lisa, Mark, and Tom already there, along with Admiral Wilson and several high-ranking officers he didn't recognize. "Please be seated, Lieutenant," Wilson said, his tone formal but less hostile than before. Once Cooper was seated, a woman in a Science Division uniform stood up. "For those who don't know me, I'm Dr. Emily Wright, Chief of Xenotechnology Research. My team has spent the last 72 hours analyzing both the impossibility and the captured Vex vessel from Proxima." Dr. Wright activated a holographic display in the center of the table. It showed detailed scans of both ships' internal structures. "What we've discovered is unprecedented," she continued. "The underlying technology in both vessels shares key similarities. Not just similarities. In some cases, identical design philosophies and components." Cooper leaned forward, confused. "Are you saying the Vex ships and the design I found are from the same alien species?" "That appears to be the case," Dr. Wright confirmed. "There are differences, of course. The Vex ships show evidence of significant modifications and a different aesthetic approach. But at their core, both technologies stem from the same source." "That doesn't make sense," Lisa objected. "Why would the same species create both the Vex ships and the design that can defeat them?" Admiral Wilson pressed a button, and a new hologram appeared, a translation of data recovered from the damaged Vex ship. "We believe we've found the answer," he said grimly. "The Vex aren't a natural species. They appear to be artificial constructs created to serve as enforcers." "Enforcers of what?" Cooper asked. "Technological boundaries," Dr. Wright explained. "According to what we've translated, the Vex were created by an ancient species calling themselves the Founders. The Founders believed that certain technologies were too dangerous to exist, and they created the Vex to prevent lesser species from developing these technologies." The implications hit Cooper like a physical blow. "And now the Vex are attacking us because we built the impossibility, a ship using technology the Founders deemed too dangerous." "That's our current theory," Wilson confirmed. "Your discovery and use of this technology triggered some kind of alert system. The Vex attacks aren't random. They're specifically targeting human colonies because we've crossed a line the Founders drew millennia ago." The room fell silent as everyone processed this revelation. "There's more," Dr. Wright continued after a moment. "The design you found, Lieutenant Cooper, appears to be what we might call a failsafe. The message you translated suggesting the design was abandoned out of fear. We believe it wasn't fear of what other species might do with it, but fear of what might be necessary if the Vex ever malfunctioned or exceeded their programming. So the founders created the Vex as enforcers, Mark summarized, but they also created the impossibility design as a way to stop the Vex if needed. Precisely, Dr. Wright nodded. It's the ultimate check and balance. They created enforcers to prevent dangerous technology from spreading, but they also created a countermeasure in case those enforcers became a threat themselves. Cooper thought back to the mysterious message he had found on the abandoned station. I fear what may come from the darkness between stars. The founder who left that message, Cooper said slowly, they must have suspected that something like this might happen, that the Vex might someday target a species that didn't deserve it. Admiral Wilson's expression was grim. And now humanity is caught in the middle of an ancient alien conflict. The Vex won't stop attacking until we abandon this technology, or until we defeat them. Can we defeat them? Tom asked, his voice small in the large room. All eyes turned to Lisa, who had been studying the technical readouts carefully. The impossibility proved we can hurt them, she said. But it's just one ship, and it's not even completed to the full design specifications. We were lucky at Proxima. Then we need more than luck, Wilson declared. We need more ships like the Impossibility. Cooper looked at the Admiral in surprise. You want to build more? Wilson nodded firmly. The Defense Council has authorized the immediate construction of 5 additional vessels based on the alien design. Dr. Reed, you and your team will work with our engineers to refine the technology and oversee the construction. And what about us? Cooper asked, gesturing to himself and his friends. You, Lieutenant, along with Mr. Davis and Mr. Wilson, are being officially reassigned to a new division, the Advanced Defensive Technologies Unit. Your job will be to train the crews who will operate these new ships. Your unorthodox methods may have broken regulations, but they've also given humanity its only effective weapon against the Vex. Cooper felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. They weren't being court-martialed after all. There's one more thing, Dr. Wright added, her expression troubled. Our analysis of the Vex data suggests that these aren't all of them. The ships we've encountered appear to be scouts or advance forces. If we don't find a way to end this conflict soon, we may face a much larger invasion. The meeting concluded with a sense of both urgency and purpose. As Cooper and his team left the conference room, they knew that their discovery had forever changed humanity's place in the galaxy. The warship that shouldn't exist had become humanity's best hope for survival. So, Mark said as they walked toward their new quarters, from criminals to humanity's last hope in 3 days. Not bad. Cooper smiled, but his mind was already racing ahead to the challenges they faced. The impossibility had proven itself in battle, but the war was just beginning. And somewhere out there, the mysterious founders who had created both the Vex and the means to defeat them might still be watching, waiting to see what humanity would do with their dangerous legacy. 6 months passed in a blur of frantic activity. The shipyards around Earth and Mars worked day and night, implementing the alien designs under Lisa's supervision. What would normally take years was compressed into months through necessity and human determination. Cooper stood in the observation deck of Earth Central, watching as the 5th and final new warship moved into formation with its siblings. They were beautiful in a strange way, each one built on the same principles as the Impossibility but refined and improved. Unlike the rough, unfinished appearance of the original, these ships had smooth, complete hulls that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The Phoenix, the Defiance, the Vengeance, the Guardian, and the Horizon, Mark said, joining Cooper at the window. Plus the original Impossibility, now fully upgraded. 6 ships against the Vex fleet. Cooper nodded. 6 ships that shouldn't exist, but they do. The past months had been difficult. The Vex attacks had intensified, striking deeper into human territory. 15 colonies had been attacked, with 7 completely destroyed despite the fleet's best efforts. Conventional weapons remained nearly useless against the alien ships. Only the Impossibility, darting from battle to battle, had managed to slow the advance. But now, they had a real fighting force. "Admiral Wilson wants to see us," Mark said, breaking into Cooper's thoughts. "The final crew selections have been made." In the Admiral's office, Cooper found Wilson looking more tired than he'd ever seen him. The war was taking its toll on everyone, but especially on those in command. "Lieutenant Cooper, or should I say Captain Cooper now," Wilson greeted him. "The final preparations are complete. All 6 ships are fully operational and their crews have completed basic training." "That's good news, sir," Cooper replied. "But basic training won't be enough against the Vex." Wilson nodded grimly. "Which is why I've approved your recommended command structure. Each ship will be led by someone who was involved with the original Impossibility project." Cooper had expected this but was still surprised to hear it confirmed. "So the assignments are final?" "Yes. You'll command the Impossibility. Dr. Reed will take the Phoenix. Her engineering expertise makes her the logical choice despite her lack of military background. Davis has the Defiance, and Wilson the Guardian. Commanders Lee and Rodriguez, who've both served alongside you in recent battles, will take the Vengeance and Horizon." The intercom on Wilson's desk buzzed. "Admiral, priority message from the outer sensor network." Wilson's face hardened. "Put it through." A holographic display appeared above the desk, showing a tactical map of the solar system. Red dots appeared at the edge, moving slowly but steadily inward. "Vex signatures detected at the system boundary," reported a tense voice. "Current count is 37 vessels, all larger than previously encountered types. Estimated time to Earth orbit, 48 hours. Cooper felt his blood run cold. 37. The largest group we faced so far was 8. "This is it," Wilson said quietly. "The main invasion force. Our intelligence suggested they were gathering for a major assault, but we didn't expect so many." "We're not ready," Cooper admitted. "The crews need more time." "Time is the one thing we don't have," Wilson interrupted. "This is the moment we've been preparing for. Captain Cooper, assemble your squadron. You launch in 3 hours." As Cooper rushed to the briefing room, where the command crews were waiting, he felt the weight of responsibility like never before. 6 ships against 37. The odds were impossible. But then again, so was the very existence of their ships. The briefing was short and to the point. Cooper laid out what they knew about the Vex force and their planned response. "We'll intercept them near the orbit of Jupiter," he explained to the assembled officers. "That gives us space to maneuver and keeps the battle away from populated areas." "What's the strategy against so many?" asked Commander Lee, a small, intense woman who had distinguished herself in previous engagements. "We use what makes our ships special," Cooper replied. "The Vex vessels are faster and more heavily armed than anything in the human fleet, except for us. We have the same technological base, which means we can match their speed and power." Lisa stepped forward. "The key is the phase disruptors. They affect the atomic structure of the Vex hulls in a way nothing else can. We've modified the targeting systems to focus multiple beams on the same point, which should increase penetration and damage." "What about their numbers advantage?" Rodriguez asked. He was a veteran of the early battles, one of the few who had survived an encounter with the Vex before the Impossibility arrived. "We stay mobile and coordinated," Cooper answered. "The Vex operate as individual units. They're powerful but predictable. We'll use squadron tactics, focusing our fire on one target at a time." The launch of the 6 ships was watched by billions across the human colonies. These strange vessels represented humanity's best, perhaps only, hope against the Vex. As they accelerated away from Earth, forming up in a tight V formation, with the Impossibility at its head, cheers erupted in mission control. Cooper felt the familiar hum of the ship around him. The bridge was more polished now, with proper stations and displays, but the heart of the vessel remained the same alien technology that had saved them at Proxima. "All ships reporting ready, Captain," Tom reported from his communication station. "Formation is holding as we accelerate." "Take us to battle speed," Cooper ordered. "Let's meet them as far from Earth as possible." The journey to the intercept point took less than 10 hours, a fraction of what conventional ships would have required. As they approached, the Vex fleet became visible on their long-range sensors. "They've changed course," Lisa reported, studying the tactical display. "They're forming into an attack pattern. They know we're coming." Cooper wasn't surprised. The Vex had shown remarkable adaptability in previous encounters. "All ships, this is Captain Cooper. Final system checks now. Weapons hot, shields at maximum. Remember your training and trust your ships." These vessels were designed specifically to fight the Vex. They shouldn't exist by any normal standard of human technology. But they do, and that gives us our edge. The two fleets closed rapidly. The Vex ships were massive black shapes against the stars, their strange, organic-looking design still unsettling to human eyes. They outnumbered the human squadron by more than 6-1. "They're powering up weapons," Tom warned. "Evasive pattern Delta," Cooper commanded. "Phoenix and Defiance, target the lid ship. Guardian and Vengeance, provide covering fire. Horizon, stay in reserve and watch for flanking maneuvers." The space between the fleets lit up as the Vex fired first. Dozens of red energy beams slicing toward the human ships. But the advanced shields held as the 6 ships split apart in practiced maneuvers, presenting harder targets while maintaining their coordinated attack. The Impossibility dived directly toward the center of the Vex formation, drawing fire from multiple enemies. As the Vex concentrated on what they perceived as the greatest threat, the Phoenix and Defiance struck from opposite angles, their phase disruptors converging on a single Vex vessel. The effect was dramatic. Where the Impossibility alone had damaged Vex ships, the combined firepower of 2 improved vessels tore the enemy ship apart completely. The explosion created a momentary gap in the Vex formation, a gap Cooper immediately exploited. "All ships, follow me through. Target second layer, vessels 3 and 5. For the next several hours, space around Jupiter became a battlefield unlike anything humanity had ever witnessed. The 6 human ships darted and weaved through the larger Vex fleet, using their superior coordination and targeted strikes to slowly even the odds. 3 hours into the battle, they had destroyed 11 Vex ships while losing none of their own, though all 6 vessels showed damage from repeated hits. "The Guardian's main shields are failing," Tom reported as they regrouped for another attack run. "They can't take another direct hit." Cooper made a quick decision. "Guardian, fall back to defensive position. Everyone else, form up on the Impossibility. We're going for their command ship." Lisa's voice came through the comm. "Cooper, are you sure? We've never been able to identify a command structure in their fleet." "Look at their movement patterns," Cooper replied. "The large vessel in the center never engages directly, but the others consistently move to protect it. That's our target." The 5 remaining ships formed a tight arrowhead formation, with the Impossibility at its tip. At Cooper's command, they accelerated to maximum speed, their subspace drives pushing the limits of what even their advanced hulls could withstand. The Vex responded immediately, with multiple vessels moving to intercept. But the human ships were too fast, too coordinated. They punched through the defensive screen, taking damage but maintaining their formation. "All ships, target these coordinates," Cooper ordered, highlighting a specific section of the massive central Vex vessel. "Fire phase disruptors on my mark. Now." 5 blue-white beams converged on a single point of the Vex command ship. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, a ripple of energy spread across the ship's hull, followed by cascading explosions that tore through its structure. "Direct hit," Tom shouted. "Their core is destabilizing. All ships, break off and retreat to safe distance," Cooper commanded. As the human ships pulled away, the Vex command vessel erupted in a massive explosion. But what happened next was even more surprising. The remaining Vex ships suddenly ceased fire. They drifted, seemingly without purpose or direction. "They've stopped attacking," Lisa reported, wonder in her voice. All Vex vessels show power fluctuations. It's like they've been deactivated. Cooper watched in amazement as the once fearsome Vex fleet became little more than floating debris. The destruction of the command ship had somehow shut down the entire fleet. The founders built in a failsafe, Cooper realized, just like they left the designs for our ships. They never intended the Vex to be unstoppable. As the human ships cautiously approached the dormant Vex vessels, Cooper felt a mixture of relief and unease. They had won. Humanity had survived its first encounter with a vastly superior alien force. But the technology that had saved them came from a mysterious species that had vanished long ago, leaving behind both the threat and the means to defeat it. "Captain," Tom called out, his voice tense, "I'm detecting an unusual signal coming from the remains of the Vex command ship. It's some kind of message." On the main screen, symbols appeared that Cooper recognized from the alien station where this had all begun. As the translation software processed them, a simple message appeared. "The test is complete. You have proven worthy of the legacy. We will be watching." Cooper stared at the message, a chill running down his spine. This wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. Somewhere out there, the founders or their descendants were watching humanity's progress, and the warships that shouldn't exist had just announced humanity's arrival on a much larger galactic stage. As the 6 ships turned back toward Earth, carrying news of their victory, Cooper knew that everything had changed. Humanity had faced its first real interstellar threat and survived, thanks to a warship that by all normal rules of human technology shouldn't exist. But it did exist, and with it, humanity's future among the stars was secured.